Hey, before we get to this interview with Pete of SGC, I want to say that there were some technical problems and his video didn't work from about 15 minutes in all the way to the end. It barely worked. It was kind of in and out. His audio was perfect though, so I left it. I hesitated with it as it was happening and I thought, do I start this over? Do I have us restart this? Ultimately, I decided I was just going to let it run. And it's basically like you can see me, which is less than ideal, and you can hear him. And it's kind of like a podcast of Pete, a Pete cast, I guess. Really, really good. I mean, the things that I find the things that he said very valuable. If you follow me, you know I don't grade a lot of cards, despite what you see here. I'm a big SGC fan of what Pete has done since taking over the company and where they are going. I think that it's a really interesting company compared to PSA and BGS and CSG, and I really appreciate what they've done. As a guy who works in corporate America for a global company, I look at what they're doing and I'm impressed. So while I don't throw a lot of money at SGC, although I have an order going out to them today for myself, my friend Kevin, and my friend Oliver with 15 or 20 cards, I'm not a big card grader. But the things that Pete says about the card industry and grading cards and SGC are too valuable to not put out there. And Pete was so gracious afterwards when I told him about the video not working. He said, I'm happy to just do the entire thing over again, which is awesome. Of course, I'm not going to do that, but I really appreciated Pete's passion and the words that he says. Before I go in there, though, I also want to add that hobbynewsdaily.com launches this Saturday. I think it's going to be a fantastic new product, a new addition to the hobby. Hobbynewsdaily.com. Check it out. It's out now, and you can get some of the things that are now, but it's going to be fully live on Saturday, April 1st. I'm really excited to see what happens with Hobby News Daily over the coming months. All right, here we go. Let's jump right into this interview with Pete.
All right. Hey, everybody. It's Mike. Thanks for tuning back in. I am joined by the CEO of SGC, Peter Steinberg. Peter, thank you very much for joining me today. I know you're a very busy guy.
Anytime, Mike. I'm always happy to hop on and kind of talk to hobby and SGC.
Yeah. And, I was just watching your interview from a month or so ago with Ryan of Breakout Cards. Great stuff. Very enlightening. I'm going to try not to cover the same things that he did. I have a different spin on it, I think, than he does. He asked a lot of really good questions. First of all, very important stuff. Why is your Twitter account suspended?
You know, news to me. I came in this morning. It's so funny because I said to myself before coming on with you, Mike, I said, should I mention it? Should I not mention it? Basically, I come into work this morning and I see that my Twitter's been suspended because I've been reported to be a bot or breaking the rules of Twitter in some way. What I'd really like to think is that Twitter just did this themselves and that no one reported me, whether it be I don't know, a competitor or someone who didn't like their grades. But apparently, I'm not worthy of having a Twitter. So SGC Pete has been suspended. We're obviously appealing that because I'm not a robot. But yeah, that was news to me, Mike, and it's funny that you brought that up because I was thinking about it myself.
Yeah, I was pretty surprised because I've never seen you say anything remotely controversial. Maybe they're just surprised at how consistent SGC's grades are and
Yeah,
assume
exactly.
must be a robot behind them.
Exactly. I don't know. In all seriousness, though, I really have no idea what that is, and I just hope that it's not. I hope it's just Twitter being weird, and I don't know, but we're working on it. Sorry about
Yeah, no worries. So speaking of consistency, I think that when you look at the grading companies, I watch a lot of grading reveals, whether it's SGC or the other companies. The one thing that always stands out to me is how consistently SGC grades. And your grades are predictable. People say, I think this is going to grade between a 7 or 8, and it comes back a 7, 7.5, 8, pretty consistently. Whereas other companies, you say, I think this is going to grade between a 7 and 8, it could come back a 4. And people are looking at them like, why? What is it about SGC that allows that to happen?
That's a really good question, and I appreciate the kind words there. I think, obviously, I can't speak for anything that goes on at a competitor's facility. I can only speak to ours, and I could say, Mike, that I've literally been a part of the team that's kind of built this operation into what it is today. When I joined SGC, we had an amazing grading room, but let's face it, going from a few hundred really well graded cards a day to many thousand really well graded cards a day is quite an undertaking. And when we built this, we truly didn't cut a single corner. The fact is that it costs SGC a lot more money actually to grade cards than it does many of our competitors, because we just refuse to just kind of grade it and let it go, if that makes sense. Instead, we refer to it internally as our proofing department. Kind of externally, it's no more as like the QA department, but that's no joke. That's not a look at it and it's a card and a holder and the holder sealed, pass it on. I mean, they're under halogen lamps, the same exact tools and environment that our graders are under in order to pick up surface blemishes, wrinkles, creases, that kind of thing. They're trained exactly really like graders are, except the difference is instead of evaluating the card raw, they're evaluating it in the SGC holder. So the members of that department usually are people who have kind of graduated from every other department before them, because let's face it, they're not only checking the quality of the card's grade, they're making sure that it's identified correctly. Is it a 1956 Topps with a white back or a gray back variation? Is it a 2018 Donruss Optic that's I don't know, a purple Pulsar prism? Those kinds of things all go into it. So there's really not a member of our team that's just here to kind of, click a button or punch the clock. We all are card people. And primarily in that QA or proofing department, boy, do we take the quality seriously. So it's really not surprising. I think what's sometimes surprising to me when people say, wow, your grades are so consistent, it's like, well, all it takes is to take grading really, really seriously and to take your quality really seriously. And, apparently we kind of stand out in that respect, which is great. But to me, it should be the normal. How do we have, we all have our limitations, obviously, and mistakes happen. But you certainly want to set yourself up to be as successful as possible. And with our fantastic quality assurance department and just an amazing grading room, we feel we've done just that.
Thanks. So you talked about when you started with SGC, and I tried finding, a press release when you were promoted to CEO, president.
Mhm.
Couldn't find one. And I think you're only 28 years old, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
When did you start with SGC? Talk to me a little bit about your rise with SGC. That's really
Sure.
interesting to me.
Sure. And I just got chills. I always love thinking about like my rise at SGC in the old days. It's such a cool time in my life. Basically, I joined SGC in January-ish of 2018. And I'm so thankful that I got in right then, Mike, because I got to see kind of the old hobby. And remember, the hobbies matured like 40 years in 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
So I got to kind of see the hobby prior to the boom and the explosion. And really, when I joined SGC, we were just an amazing group of experts, is what it was. We had all the expertise in the world, but we just hadn't necessarily done a great job of telling the hobby our story and telling the hobby how much we appreciated the opportunity to be the experts of the hobby. And I honestly, I was a card collector my entire life, and joining SGC at the entry level, by the way, was just a mind-blowing opportunity for me. And anyone who's met me knows I'm a pretty energetic guy. I'm very passionate. And when I got in here, it was just like, holy cow, let's become the best damn version of a grading company we could ever want to be. And we already had the experts. So it was really just about unwinding some mistakes that had been done in the past and really just messaging and letting people know that Scott Heilman, our head grader, has been here for 25 years and he loves cards more than life itself. Like, that's all it really took at the end of the day. It's just honesty, transparency, and the expertise. And the nice thing is I had a huge leg up because the experts here, man, I mean, money can't buy that kind of thing. It's just that's our edge. It's that no matter how we are at messaging or marketing or how well capitalized we may be relative to the competition, when you're kind of the best at the grading, it's gonna be hard not to do well, if that makes sense. So I really put all the success that we've achieved on those guys. And speaking to my rise, it really one thing led to another, and brick by brick, I got extremely lucky early on and was given quite an opportunity. I had kind of a fork in the road where I could have either been myself, the true kind of, you know, freakishly passionate card collector that I am, or I could have kind of changed, almost tried to put on a front, if that makes sense, and been the CEO that, you know, I should be. And I just chose like, I love this thing, man, and I'm gonna speak to people, and I'm gonna go on YouTube shows, and I don't like to think of SGC as being above the hobby, looking down on those collectors, telling them what they should feel or love or collect or anything like that. I am part of the hobby. At the end of the day, SGC is looking to its left and its right when it looks at the hobby itself, and that's why I think that's been a recipe for our success. I guess I don't know. We have guys like you to thank, supporters who have SGC cards, obviously. So it's been surreal.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you credit luck for some of your success, because it's so rare when somebody who's so successful believes that luck had anything to do with it. And so it's refreshing to hear that.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it, man. I think yeah, this whole thing is just one day maybe when I'm an old man, I'll look back and write a book or something, because this has just been the craziest journey. And you know, I think at times, Mike, I am so proud of where SGC is today, but at the same time, naturally in me, what's made us really kind of successful here at growing is the fact that we are constantly dissatisfied with ourselves. We never look in the mirror and are almost, you know, beating our chests. Oh, look at us, look what we've accomplished. It's the opposite. It's look what we have not accomplished. Look how much improvement we still have to make in this area. And I think as happy as I am with the state of SGC today, naturally, you know, I'm a lot more focused on what I can be better at, what our team could be better at, than how awesome we are. But I think it means a lot to me that at times in the past we didn't have, call it, all our ducks in a row. We had those experts, but there were some, call it, concessions that a collector may have been making when grading with SGC. And what I'm so proud of today is we've worked on those things, we've corrected those things, and there's so much happening behind the scenes from an innovation standpoint. I mean, this hobby does not know what it has got. Like, it is dangerous to put a guy like me in charge of a grading company, because I'm just not going to stop until I totally give the power to the people. And I love SGC, man. And people always ask, what's your ultimate goal? It's not to make a ton of money. It's to be everyone's favorite grading company. Like, that's what I want on like my grade. Gave his life to trading cards. That's what means a lot to me. And maybe I'm weird for that, but let's face it, I'm talking to the junk wax hero right now, so you kind of know what I mean, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Last summer, you graded the Mantle 52 tops, 9.5, sold for 12.6 million. We're not going to talk a lot about that because it's been talked about at length. I've worked in operations most of my career, so I'm really interested in the operations. And I think to your 2023 tops, $9 a card, and compare that to that Mantle, how many people touch and review a 1952 Mantle that looks like could be a 10 versus a 2023 tops card that they paid $9 for?
Yeah, so this is why I gave you that QA department and credit to the grading room when I talked about the consistent grading, because I'm so proud of the answer, which is that the same, I don't want to say the same amount of people, because I have to be honest, when the 9.5 was in our building, it was like, I mean, it was let's face it, it was a very different card. Obviously, we knew what we had, and it was a totally different, you know, I don't want to say process, because that's not what was different, but it's more that naturally it's almost like every grader is going to assess the card. And it's not only going to go to one member of our QA team, it's almost like the whole QA team is going to take its look. And a lot of that, if I'm being honest, is a bit redundant because once you have 3-4 graders looking at the thing, how many times do we have to just agree with each other that it's better than a 9, but not quite a 10, essentially? But I will say this, when it comes to 2023 Top Series 1, the reason I say the same amount is because those cards, okay, which many of which, remember, are lower end cards, which is why people are so excited to take advantage of the extremely low price point. Those cards are graded, then they're checked in the grading room, okay, by kind of like, imagine, I don't want to say a head grader, but almost one of our senior level graders will kind of just review the work of the grader that assigned the grades. From there, the card enters the normal process. And after it's encapsulated, it goes to QA, where it's basically checked for quality. We have to make sure that we preserve the condition of the card, that we didn't change that condition. Naturally, when you're handling cards, you have to be mindful of every possible kind of bad thing that could go wrong, essentially. And if it's going to happen, we want to certainly limit it so it happens as little as possible. But even arguably as important as that, we want to let our customers know if, gosh forbid, we did change the grade of a card, we have to make them whole there, obviously. And we try to do that. Our QA department is usually the department that says, wait a minute, I think we might have, nicked this corner or something like that.
So I naturally have to ask, how many of your graders wanted to give it a 10?
The mantle?
Yeah.
It's funny. Remember, like it was now back in, I believe, last July, I believe, maybe late July, no, it was at the National. So it must have been early July, late June. I don't think there was one. I think that card was almost like, we even joked, like, this is the definition of why you need a 9.5, because this card would just be misgraded in a 10, but it would be equally misgraded in a 9. It's just not, it's not a 9, and I think what's really cool is that, especially when you get to those higher levels, I mean, the people that evaluated that card have literally been grading next to each other for, like, they started grading next to each other when I was like 8 years old. Let's put it that way. So they're pretty lockstep in what an SGC 9 looks like, what an SGC 9.5 looks like, and then what a 10 looks like. But naturally, to kind of enter that grade in our system for a 1952 mantle, it's a mind-blowing card, obviously.
I keep losing your video for some reason, and my video seems good. Your audio is perfect, by the way, but you seem to be back now, so I think we're good.
Sorry about that. I'm not losing you. If it means
it must be Twitter trying to take you down here too.
Yeah, exactly.
You mentioned parallels, or I guess the base cards 2023 tops. Has the proliferation of parallels, what I call the parallel universe, I did a video on it last week or the week before, has that made it more difficult to grade ultra modern cards?
It hasn't made it more difficult to grade them as much as it's made them a lot more difficult to identify.
Right.
Our research and ID team, they had their work cut out for them when it was the old-fashioned gold is numbered to 10, or if it's a baseball product, numbered to 50, and orange was 25 and blue was 150. And today it's like, this blue is this,
right,
that blue is this. It's gotten much more. It's definitely gotten much more difficult in our research and ID department. And to some degree, I'm very thankful that the version of SGC that we are today, or excuse me, the version of the hobby, kind of the way that collectors are collecting these cards, or the way that Topps or Panini are making these cards, it's much more challenging. Where if back in 2020, before we had this kind of explosive growth, it would have been more difficult to scale back then with just such an extensive array, not only of, remember, modern cards with the parallels, but today SGC is very strong in the non-sports market. We're very strong in the vintage soccer market. Those are very difficult cards at times to identify. And the good news is, as we have grown, kind of after that growth took place, we've seen a tsunami of those cards. So I'm very thankful that they came in after the growth took place rather than before, because that's a lot of operational stress for sure.
Yeah. So you talked about a month ago or so on an SGC video that in about a month you're going to release have a big announcement. Do you want to break that news here right now?
I don't have news to break here, and to be totally honest with you, Mike, I do a lot of talking. I'm very outward. I'm very, I like telling the community kind of what's going on when I can. We have some announcements coming out soon. I think that there's what I try to toe the line between is injecting some healthy level of excitement and confidence that there's a lot of exciting things coming, without almost sounding like this guy who's constantly just pointing to the future, saying, oh, then it'll be great, then it'll be great. I can promise you that we have some things that people aren't expecting. I can promise you that tech is involved. I can promise you we are hitting it on all fronts. That's what I could say. If you've invested your, I guess, hobby funds into SGC cards as opposed to raw cards or any other cards graded by someone else, we take that almost as a personal responsibility to make well on your to make right, I guess, on the choice that you made to trust our team. And I happen to think that SGC is extremely well positioned, not only with the strength we've gained, but with the strength that we've gained with still so much opportunity in front of us. So much. I mean, the largest competitor that we face here, obviously, in PSA, they have an entire ecosystem built out. SGC has the best grading team in the hobby. That's what we have. But we're not stopping here. As you can imagine, this is more of a starting point. So I'm really looking forward to kind of addressing some things that people have wanted us to address for a long time. And I really think it'll make every SGC collector better off from it. That's the ultimate goal, obviously. That's literally what I come into work for every day. It's to bring the SGC brand forward. And although I don't have news to share today, I'm going to be sharing news very soon. And even after that news, there's more news coming behind that. And we kind of have like an on deck batter, an in the hole announcement, and even one after that. So a lot.
Wow. So on the breakout cards Ryan Nolan interview you did a month or two ago, you mentioned that you'd be rolling out an app soon, which is very cool. Is there anything else you can share about that, or is that a future announcement?
I could say this. I mean, the app, one thing that I could say about the app is that the app was technically kind of ready to go many, many months ago. And I didn't release it. I just wasn't, I don't want to just have an app to say, there you go, I have an app. I want the app to actually bring value to SGC collectors. And look, I'm not going to lie, that doesn't mean, that this app is some kind of, absolute game changer. I'm not trying to oversell the thing at all, but for God's sakes, if we're going to invest the kind of time and resources that we are to please our existing customers and to hopefully convince more people to kind of jump towards SGC with their collection, we have to make sure it counts. So I think that this app is a really good starting off point for sure. But what I'm more excited is kind of what's coming after the app. And the app is almost a prerequisite to just begin, call it a lot of other things. So I'm just looking forward to kind of, we're in, call it the top of the ninth when it comes to the app, call it development, testing, that kind of thing. And after that goes out there, that's when we have a lot of fun and we start kind of sprinting here. So exciting time.
Yeah. So, I'm on Hobby Think Tank, which is a Bench Clear Media channel or video series on Bench Clear Media. And in our pilot episode, we had all four of us, the co-hosts, talking about all of the grading companies and what's best and what's not great about any of them. And we all agreed SGC has the most consistent grading. And the only thing that holds SGC back is the lack of a registry. And when I think about, I've worked in, as I said, operations analytics for many, many years. And I think about how do you get a customer to be sticky, meaning that they are willing to stick with your company and not go to a competitor. And in your case, it's got to be a registry, and that's why people are staying with one of your top competitors, because they're very, very loyal to that registry.
I think there's a lot of things. That's the best part. That's exactly my point. It's that you look at what we're not doing, and I'm so much more interested in talking about that and addressing that than the fact that we're doing some things really, really well. And the registry being one of them, for example. But the thing to keep in mind for everyone is, there's a company that was willing to partner with Topps and offer a mind-blowing price on a massive set. There's a company that was willing to say, you know what, we could charge everyone a standard price and give them a 30-day turnaround time, and then totally upcharge them for like a 5-day service. Heck, we could charge them more for 10-day. Maybe we could even squeeze some dollars out of them to give them a 15-day service. And we just said, no, let's just not do any of that and just offer every customer that submits cards to us pretty much a 3 to 5 business day turnaround time. The reason I'm saying this, Mike, is because I truly believe that when SGC catches up in these few areas, we are going to be dangerous, because we just aren't this old. I don't want to say old, but we're not as set in our ways. We listen. We want to push the envelope. We want to take it further. We want to see the hobby move into a better future rather than just the old school way of doing things. And again, right now, I only have so much power to do so because we don't have things like a registry and so much else. But what I'm very excited for is that we are working very, very hard here to kind of get to a point where we can then apply that call it good guy and girl nature of the SGC team that we try to emanate here and we try to give to the hobby. We can now apply that on a much broader scale and really, hopefully, make a huge impact on this hobby, because as I said before, that is the ultimate goal.
Yeah, for sure. Pete, I'm just gonna move you out of this room, see if I can get your video to come back consistently. Hang tight just 1 second.
Okay.
Still there?
I'm here, yeah.
I may have lost you completely.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine, yeah.
Okay.
There's no...
See, what's weird is I see me perfectly. I see you as well, by the way.
I've never had this problem with StreamYard. Hoping you'll come back in here. This is frustrating. Would you mind just leaving? Oh, there you are.
Okay.
We're back. It's very strange. Sorry about this.
Yeah, no problem.
So, now I completely lost my train of thought. Last week, I do a weekly Attic Find Friday series that has seen some pretty significant popularity. Last week, I did it on the Baggy Find, which included the Babe Ruth 1916 Sporting News card that was graded by SGC. I think it came back a 4. When you get a card like that has been graded, 20 times, I think, and it's a Babe Ruth rookie, does everybody crowd around and want to see it? What is that like?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is yes. Like there would be a problem with our personnel if the answer wasn't yes, and that's something we take a ton of pride in. That's what we're going for. I mean, if our graders aren't like, holy cow, Scott's got a Ruth rookie in his hands, or even every step of the process for that matter, people aren't kind of feeling some level of excitement, or there's no emotion evoked by a Babe Ruth 1916 rookie where he weighs like 180 pounds and he's a pitcher for the Red Sox. That is, if that doesn't get you, then you probably shouldn't be working for a professional authenticity and grading company for trading cards, because that is the cream of the crop, and that's what that's kind of the, call it a test of who should be here and who shouldn't. And I'm very happy to say that my team members for the most part would lose their mind over something like that. And to be totally clear as well, Mike, that's a vintage Ruth rookie. We have a lot of young team members here who are more modern collectors who are, if they see that whatever it is, Trevor Lawrence NTRPA 1 of 99 or a LeBron exquisite RPA. They equally will lose their mind. And I think what you want to do is not only encourage that kind of thing, which is the actual passion in the collecting of your team members, but what we really try to do here, this is something I personally am very passionate about, is making the people that get really jazzed up by that Ruth also jazzed up by the LeBron and vice versa. I think that's what the hobby needs to work on as a whole. It's taking a vintage collector and showing them that, you know, some parts of the modern card space you might not love, and maybe even for good reason, but there are some really cool things about modern as well. And the same goes for vintage. I'm not expecting every modern collector to just become passionate about collecting the 1958 Topps set as a whole. But for God's sakes, how about the 58 Aaron? Like that guy's kind of a big deal, you know, and like those cards are kind of really old. And when they were released, they were worth absolutely nothing. Kind of cool how those have appreciated in value, huh? You know, so that's what I try to do. And I always say my absolute dream job beyond kind of running SGC is I just want to like take the hobby and just speak about how awesome cards are constantly and just convince more of your average people to collect them. And again, encourage that crossover effect where there's not as much segmentation and there's more just an overall group of people that share an appreciation. You know, that's how I collect, by the way. I have modern, vintage, Pokemon. I constantly want to, you know, I'm just a collector by nature. So, yeah, a long-winded version, but the answer is yes. We lose our minds over Babe Ruth rookies.
That's great to hear. You talk about your personal collection, and I saw a lot of those cards. If anybody wants to see Pete's personal collection, go to Breakout Cards video from a month or two ago where he interviewed him. But I noticed that you don't have SGC 10s. You have SGC 7, SGC 1, SGC 3, which I thought was really cool to see. You know, you're not sending in your cards and having graders say, "Oh, this is Pete. Let's bump up his grade."
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, in addition, I'm not really sending in my cards. Like the only thing I'll do sometimes if I buy a card, I'll want it in our new label, so I'll send it in for reholder, in other words, that kind of thing. But you know, all of the cards that I buy that are SGC graded, I bought on the secondary market, and yeah, I love buying SGC cards. To be honest, Mike, my wife was glued to the Bachelor finale last night, and I was glued to eBay and the different auction houses. You know, and
Sounds very relatable.
that's kind of the way your average night goes. And even that video with Ryan that we did on my PC, I've added a ton of cards since that video. So I am truly, believe me, I don't just talk the talk, and I don't know what I would have done as a kid without cards. I don't know what I do now without cards. I mean it. The reason I can, you know, go live or do any kind of speaking and not have to prepare and put things off limits, don't mention this, is just because I'm not, you know, I'm not I'm not a tech CEO. I'm just not. I have no experience in Silicon Valley. I haven't IPO'd 3 companies on my resume. I just am the world's biggest card collector who, based on that passion, will work harder than anyone else, and I will be honest along the way. And the good news is that a while back, I put faith that the hobby really wants that at its core, you know, and I think SGC's growth has been indicative of the fact that that is in fact the case, that although technology and innovation are absolutely essential to the future growth and longevity of the hobby, at the end of the day, if we lose this, which is just that passion for what we're doing, that sincere appreciation for trading cards at their you know, in their simplest form, call it, then it doesn't matter how much technology you have, this whole thing is gonna die. And I think that that's what's nice. I'm putting the people around me, call it, to complement that passion and kind of check all the boxes. So it's a great time to be at SGC, and anyone watching this, boy, do we have you to thank for it, because we would not be here if there were not, you know, guys and girls like you know, watching a YouTube video on 2 guys talking about a card grading company. So it's It's pretty awesome.
Yeah. You showed one of your cards was a Ty Cobb bat on shoulder, I think, or bat off shoulder.
Off shoulder in a 6.
Yeah, and you talked about how I think it was that card. It was very obvious from looking at it that it wasn't trimmed, and that almost earns it another 0.5 in the grade. Can you talk a little bit about that and how appearance matters in a grade?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, certainly at SGC. Remember, I'm not, the standards are
Right.
not set across the board. Like
Sure.
I truly don't know any more about the other grading companies from a, call it, standards perspective than you or anyone else does in the hobby. But at SGC, we put a lot of stock in originality, and we put a lot of stock in eye appeal. And the reason is because we totally and completely understand that we are here to be the hobby referees and serve the hobby. So, for example, if the hobby said, you know what, eye appeal doesn't matter anymore, we'll take ugly cards. Ugly cards are just as good as cards that are beautiful. We'd probably stop knocking cards that are out of register. Because if the collectors don't feel that way, then as the hobby referees that are kind of calling balls and strikes, why should we be acting in that way, if that makes sense? In other words, a grading company should be grading almost towards the hobby's interests, towards what the collectors have in mind, rather than against it, in our opinion. And I think that more than anything, I always say, certainly internally to the staff, SGC's job is to make sure that no seller of a card gets almost less than their card is worth. At the same time, it's to ensure that no buyer pays more than that card is worth. So in other words, what I'm saying is that we are looking to make for equal transactions where the buyer knows I'm getting a 4, and the reason it's a 4 and not a 9 is because there's a wrinkle on the back, but the seller is getting a 4 rather than a 3-5 if his card should be a 4. It's this balancing act, I guess, between a technical scale and kind of this expert artistry, call it. It doesn't take a genius to know when a card is dead centered, or know when a T206 has such fat borders that the thing is just as original as a card gets. And our grading team, they can tell, believe me, when a card not only is trimmed, but they know when a card has been soaked, cleaned. The thing that I want everyone to realize is there's a lot of stuff that happens to these cards, guys, a lot. And it is important, if I'm you all, which remember, I at least like to consider myself to be, if I'm just a card collector who doesn't have an association with a grading company, I would want that grading company assigning some level of bonus to, we are not pretty sure that this hasn't been trimmed. We are 100% positive that this card with those razor sharp corners and edges has not been trimmed. I mean, that to me, that's our job. It's to say this thing is even better than the other 6, if that makes sense, or whatever that may be. So the idea that we assign those kind of bonus points and step back and act as almost that art critic rather than just your technical, I am a grader, this like robotic type style, 100%. We're proud of that. I've seen most people love that. I've seen people that are like, what do you mean? Just do your job, put your head down and shut up. Okay, well, there are other grading companies. That's not how we choose to grade cards. We don't think it's effective to essentially be grading against the way that we feel the hobby's interests, have kind of been set by the hobby, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you ever find yourself watching YouTube videos of SGC reveals?
I don't. It's funny you say that, because I think that's a really fair question to your average person in the hobby. Like, hey, do you ever check out what people are saying about you? Mike, I am obsessed. I am obsessed. I mean, it's funny. You mentioned my Twitter. I was on. I fell asleep with Twitter open last night because I'm just constantly looking at what people are saying about us. And as I said before, focusing a lot more on the detractors than the gung-ho supporters. I really always want to give our supporters their due and make them feel appreciated and seen and heard. But at the same time, I am much quicker almost to respond to someone who's saying something negative about SGC, or maybe has been given misinformation, or just anything, or maybe we just made a mistake. And I just want to address the fact that, hey, tip of the cap. We made a mistake there. We're sorry, that kind of thing. But I guess the short answer to your question is, Mike, you mentioned you had that kind of like round table with bench clear. I watched that video, dude. What do you think? I'm seeing everything out there. And I think that's why I am, in a sense, uniquely positioned to take a grading company to the finish line, because I just don't want to think about anything else. I don't want to do anything else. I just want to make all of you happy to an almost like unhealthy degree, where I just want to make SGC this hobby superpower. So the answer is yes. I watch almost every grading reveal almost every day, and I mean that. Like, that's really not that much. I mean, maybe it's a bit of an exaggeration just because there are busy days, but I should say, watch every reveal every day. And I'd argue that if the other grading companies' leaders are not doing the same, I'm not overperforming, they're just underperforming. You're just not doing enough.
Well, who are those other companies' leaders? Does anybody even know? You're out there. I don't ever see anything from, I can't even name the leaders of those other companies.
Look, I can't say that. Okay.
Right.
That's for you guys to say. All I can do is try to be, what I think that collectors deserve, which is, at the very least, I'm not perfect, but I'm certainly not going to hide, and I'm not going to lie, and I'm just not. So the nice thing that I really appreciate is I see so many of you notice that and appreciate it, and that brings me tremendous happiness, because that's all I want, is to just kind of, for it to just be recognized. It doesn't even mean you have to grade with us, but I hear a lot of people that say, you know what, I'm still sending almost all of my cards to PSA, but I love that SGC is transparent, or I love that SGC is, pushes the envelope, or does these kinds of, cool promotions or anything like that. That's enough. Like, that's all I want at the end of the day. I don't need a grading company that grades 200,000 cards a day. I just want to be, honestly, liked or loved by every collector out there, because that's the 13-year-old kid in me's dream at the end of the day. And that's kind of what I'm working towards.
Well, I have a box going off to SGC this week with probably 15 to 20 cards. So you'll see another SGC reveal in the next few weeks as soon as I get those back.
Thank you, man.
Yesterday I did a video on a card. It was the 1910S Wanamaker. Connie Mack, athletics world champions, and it had never been graded before by SGC or PSA or any of the grading companies. When you get something like that, and it took about a month from the day you received it to the day the image popped, according to John Morton, who's a Twitterer, and, well, I guess you wouldn't know anymore. But it took about a month, and normally your turnaround time is much quicker. And I speculated that it's because you've never seen it before, and you need to consult more people. And I said this a while ago, that sometimes a company like SGC may need to bring in an expert in a certain set that they don't have employed, but there are people out there that are experts in very specific things. And some people in my comments said that's ridiculous. SGC is experts. They would never need to consult experts. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. It's almost a mix of the two, if that makes sense. Naturally, sure. We're not just, we're not just almost people working here that are reliant on outside experts, because we're not the experts ourselves. Naturally, I would put our grading room to anyone's grading room. If anyone wants to do a grade off, by the way, this is like an official challenge, call it. But I guess, and that's a joke, but I guess what I'm trying to say is, we are experts, but cards are so wide ranging and so extensive. And the best experts and the best authenticators are not the ones who pretend to know it all. They're actually the ones who are humble enough to realize that it is literally impossible to know it all. In fact, even from my level, Mike, it's impossible to employ people who know it all, or to keep adding people because he knows something or she knows. It's an endless journey if that makes sense. So
First, yeah.
naturally, that card was in our building, and I'm saying this off of an assumption. If I'm being honest with you, I did not track that card's kind of life cycle in our building, but it makes total sense that a totally unique, call it new to the hobby issue would take a month to grade, even with SGC's 2 to 3 business day turnaround time. Because as much as we like to give your cards back fast, we're not going to give them back if we don't feel that we got them right. So the bottom line is that, we are experts, believe me there, but we do also, more even than consulting outside experts, it's a lot of research. I mean, that happens daily, no doubt. There's definitely times where we're using outside experts, and believe me, we have a nice little network of kind of hobby resources and people like that. But at the same time, on the day-to-day basis, there's a ton of research happening really in every department. I mean, in our grading room, in research and ID. The truth is, in our quality assurance department that I've spoken a bit about here, they need the same, call it resources, for research as any other department, because they're checking the research of the person that did the research the first time, as far as what to label this card or what year this card was released, that kind of thing. So again, I think what makes a great authenticator is an authenticator who tries to know everything, but also understands that they do not know everything, and that journey of education really it never ends.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes complete sense. Thanks for explaining that. There's a lot of talk about subjectivity in grading, and we've talked a little bit about SGC's consistency, but there's a big movement in the conversation towards AI. What's your take on AI in grading?
My take on AI in grading is that if AI was even close to being able to do what my grading room currently does now, I'd be the first one to say, we've done it. AI is great. I could tell you, and this I do have a lot more experience than your average hobbyist or, Twitter user, Instagram user who's talking about AI in cards. We're not there. To be totally honest, Mike, we're not really that close. It's just cards are not 2D objects. They're actually kind of flat 3D objects. Cards range from your 1886 old judges to your, 2023 Top Series 1 cards with cabinets mixed in, with all kinds of die cuts mixed in. Again, I look at it and I say, have we taken all of the steps to fix the consistency issue in the hobby? And then are we looking at AI? Or are we just skipping from a place where we're not consistent enough, we're not doing enough about it, but we're doing some AI over here? That just doesn't make sense to me. In other words, when I believe that everyone's quality assurance department looks like mine, okay, and it's clunky, by the way, it takes time, it's expensive. It's expensive to grade cards that way, but that's the way cards should be graded. So I guess what I'm trying to say is when I feel that all of those steps have been taken across the hobby, if you then want to play around with AI and see if you could come up with, forget about just autonomous grading of cards. How about just something where it's catching counterfeit PMGs? That's something I look at and I'm like, hey, that would be a great utility for AI in the hobby. But what I refuse to hear is just like AI grades your card. I mean, that's just, it's not that I'm saying it could never happen. That's really not what I'm saying either. We're just not there yet. And even those that have said we are know that we're not there yet. We're just, that's a fact. That's not something, that's not me making an opinion. It's whether you think it's an unfortunate fact or not, it's just the way it is. And like I said, I think that as a hobby, as great as it is that we're looking to innovate here and incorporate technology and make for a better hobby future, call it a more perfect way of grading, I think that it's that time would be better spent to say, you know what, my 8, I just cracked it and resubmitted it, and you just graded a gem mint. Like, how did that happen? Mm-hmm. And one thing I could say at SGC, we don't take our SGC 8s and then you crack them and resubmit them and they become 10s. They just don't, because our grading team is too in it with each card, as is our QA team. And I think that if there are companies out there where you can actually expect that there's maybe even a lower chance, but a chance that your 8 becomes a 10, I think there's a lot more to address there before we even talk about AI personally.
Yeah, that's if you think about Chat GPT, what's the company that was it Microsoft who did that? And it's so they've got many, many billions of dollars into that. And it's deeply, deeply flawed. And you have to think about a company like SGC or even PSA, they can't put billions and billions of dollars into their card grading AI and then find that it's still deeply, deeply flawed. So I
I think
agree.
the problem
It's
is
a
it's
long
not
ways
even the
away.
money, remember, that it takes for the technology. It's the reps that that machine would need. Remember,
Yeah.
it would have to see what an 1886 old judge looks like in a 9, in an 8. And by the way, there would have to be thousands, tens of thousands of versions in a 9, in an 8.5, in an 8. And then we get to the realistic grades of a 3 or a 1.5. I mean, it's just, like I said, I'm not here to kill the entire thing and say there's no utility. Quite the opposite. I'm actually saying, hey guys, I think there's actually a better utility than kind of how we're all thinking about this. And let's instead take that time and energy and spend it on demanding some better processes in place and some more, I guess, attainable goals so that our 8s can't be resubmitted and then we get 10s. Because that, AI just becomes almost a distraction, almost look here while something terrible is going on over here. That's our stance. It's very real, it's very raw, it's very direct, and apologies if it's a little too raw, too aggressive, whatever you want to say, but I just refuse to lie or sugarcoat, and that's our stance.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. Um, when you're grading a brand new card, ultra modern versus a vintage card, are there different standards? There's a lot of talk about this as well. So when you're grading a 58 Hank Aaron, for instance, are there different standards in a 7 versus a 2023 Topps card?
Not really on that one, if you think about it. I mean, the card itself is just so different. Like you're usually at least not going to have registration issues on a 2023 Topps card. You're usually not going to have the kinds of defects that would be on a 1958 Hank Aaron. It just wouldn't happen. So don't get me wrong. It's very hard to paint with a broad brush in this sense. But generally speaking, I mean, 2023 Topps have white borders. 1958 Topps is the same idea. And if the card is shifted, 90-10 on one side or 90-10 up down, that's going to hurt the grade pretty much all the same, regardless of what year the card is from. But I'd also be lying if I said that there weren't clear, I guess you just say, differences in the way that those cards usually come in, if that makes sense. These 2023 Topps cards are printed on a much kind of sturdier paper stock, and
Right.
that paper stock isn't 75 years old, or even 60 years old, whatever it may be. So I think that it's almost an answer of most of the time, if there are 4 borders on a card, it's graded pretty similarly, but that comes with the caveat of, like, let's face it, these are very different items. And what tends to happen is on vintage, there's just more that could go wrong, if that makes sense. The print quality, like I said, the registration, so many surface issues, creasing. I mean, for a 2023 Topps card to come creased, something had to go very wrong at the factory. And for your 1958 Hank Aaron to not have a crease, it's almost the opposite. Something had to go very right for a kid to not have had fun with his card and jammed it in something or played around with it unprotected, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So what is one card, because you're a big collector, obviously, what is one card that has escaped your personal collection that you would love to add?
There's so many. It's not really like that. It's not like, oh, if I would have bought this card, but I could tell you like one card that I think is super overrated. So I know you're a vintage collector, Mike, so I'll give you this. One Saturday I had some fun and I combined the pop reports of PSA and SGC, which, by the way, is how this should go. Like, it doesn't make sense that these people are collecting these cards saying this is a pop 30 when we've graded 30 of them also. Like that.
Right.
Yeah.
There should be a master pop rule.
That's correct. 30 went to that company, 30 went to this one. Pretty sure that's called a population of 60. But anyway, I went and I combined the pop reports. And my findings were so interesting. I had no idea how rare, like to me, I'm a big Gehrig collector. I love Lou Gehrig. And his blue 34 Gaudy, which is card number 61 in that set, was, I believe, the second rarest of all the cards that I happened to look at. I think across both companies, and don't quote me on this, I'm hazy on it, but I think it was like 800 total examples graded or something crazy like that, like less than 1,000 out there. And it's just like that is mind-blowing to me. And the fact that so many cards have been crossed. Remember, like a card will go in, it'll get a 3, then it'll go to PSA and it'll get a 2 or a 4 or a 3, then it'll come back to us. You know, especially in the past, before this industry really did mature and get better at what it does as far as grading and authenticity, cards were going back and forth to companies constantly. So most of the populations that you see are actually a bit inflated. So what that means is that if the total combined population of this Lou Gehrig is 860 total copies out there, you could count on the fact that maybe only 750 actually exist. And for me, I own now 2 of them. And I'm like, holy cow, I own 1/350th of all 1934, you know, that kind of thing. I thought that was cool. Even more than that, the T227 Ty Cobb. I don't know if you know the T227 set, Mike, but it is beautiful. The artwork is amazing. They're full-size tobacco cards, which is just the coolest thing ever. And the Ty Cobb is, in my opinion, one of his best cards out there, and it is insanely rare. There's like 140 that have ever been graded total. And the card is just as affordable as your average low-grade Gaudy Ruth. So I love the T227 Cobb. I mean, look, I get really nitty-gritty. Like, I don't know, you've probably never heard of the Boston Garter set, but that's just like the coolest set ever. It basically features some early 20th century players in literally their underwear. Okay, they were selling like garters, I guess, and they have the players, like Christy Mathewson is literally in his underwear on the card because the card was meant to sell that underwear. And if that doesn't make you say that's really cool, I just don't understand you, because to me that's like the coolest thing ever. So I could go on for days about what cards I'd love to add to my collection. But I think the bottom line is there's so much that isn't talked about. Because let's face it, who's out there talking about the Boston Garter set? Not many, which really excites you about the future of the hobby, that we're still not doing enough, you know?
Yeah, hopefully my screen shared correctly, because I just showed the T227 Cobb and the Boston Garters. I don't know if it shared, because who knows, but very cool stuff. I've seen the Cobb. I had never even heard of the Boston Garters cards.
Yeah.
Yeah. So are those the 2 that you would choose for the cards that you would love to have?
Oh, I mean, yeah, I get, as you could probably tell, Mike, I get distracted very easily when talking cards. And I mean, there's the T227 Cobb, there's the Boston Garter set. I really would love to own a 14 Crackerjack Mathewson someday. I think that card is just so special. I love the fact that the pose is a one of a kind, meaning that the 1915 Crackerjack set no longer had that really cool kind of follow through pitching pose. The card's also horizontal, which I just think is so cool on a Crackerjack. Geez, what else? I would love to add, I mean, naturally, look, these cards are impossibilities for me to ever own. Don't get me wrong. But like, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Baltimore News Ruth.
Okay? Yeah, that's I have, like
1914. Naturally, any 1916 Ruth would be crazy. Lately, I've been totally nuts on the 51 Bowman Mays. I'm just trying to acquire as many of those as I can in low grade, because I just think, I don't know, I'm on a maze kick right now. It really, with me, it's like, it's dangerous. It's dangerous because it never ends, and I'm addicted to cardboard. I'm crazy about it. It's harder to ask me what I don't appreciate or what I wouldn't want to add, rather than kind of like what the one card I'm looking for is, because It's like choosing between your 5,000 children. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I've got Willie Mays as the greatest baseball player of all time on my list.
Certainly up there. Certainly up there. I mean, how could it not be? And I think that I think his 51 Bowman in particular is tragically undervalued. I mean, as you just said, possibly the greatest player of all time. Just such a beautiful first card to debut a talent like that with. And that card is such a tough grade. It comes pretty, it comes kind of ugly. They're all, very difficult to get centered, and there's so many print issues, which to me I welcome. I think it's fantastic. It just makes for more variety and more collectability there. So I'm a big Mays fan for sure.
So when you get, let's just back to that 52 mantle again for a minute. When you get a card like that, and are you aware of the provenance of the card or the story behind the card? There were rumors at the time that it was in a screw down and had gone to PSA, and PSA graded it authentic, and then it went to SGC. Are you aware of these things, if that's even true?
Yeah, I mean, look, the thing that I'm always aware of is like the rumors, because as I just said before, I'd be lying if I made it like I wasn't, because I'm just so engaged. Like I hear all the chatter like anyone else. What I could say as far as provenance goes is that we certainly welcome all the provenance in the world. I mean, I have to tell you, like if you, I don't know if that card went to PSA, if that card didn't, I have no idea the backstory of that, because frankly, I don't care. I don't know who's grading the card at PSA. I have no experience at PSA. It not only does it not matter to me, Mike, but if I'm one of your viewers, I'm wanting to hear this. Like, do you want SGC to say, oh well, they said it's a 9 and they have to be right, so we have to say it's a 9, or the opposite, where they say it's not good to grade, so it's not good. No, our job is to be that independent opinion. That's an expert opinion that most of the time, by the way, is pretty kind of lockstep for the most part with theirs, because I'm not saying they're not experts. They are, obviously. But I'm just saying in general that we are certainly independent from them. But we also welcome provenance, not so much where this card has been. That just doesn't matter to us, what PSA may have said or another grading company. But I think the provenance that we definitely appreciate is we've had sometimes, collections come in where this individual who's been collecting these cards for 85 years is now, sick and is looking to liquidate his collection to pass down to his family, for example. When we are told, or when that's a provable circumstance, call it, we take that into account, just to mean that if there's any a color on a card, it's likely not an intentional color touch by a card doctor. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. It's more, it's so difficult to just shout out examples on the fly here, but I really do my best to educate. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that overall, provenance does matter. We want to know that a card is fresh. We don't want a card that's been, had a wrinkle pressed out and been cleaned and been, that's not our favorite kind of card to evaluate, as you can imagine. The cards that we love are the fresh cards that are just 100% original. And usually our grading team is pretty spot on with seeing exactly, I mean, it's really amazing how good they are at spotting what took place sometimes years before the card was ever in their hands. I'll give you another example. I'm not going to use the person's name because I don't think I should, but a celebrity recently, a very wealthy celebrity, recently opened a pack. It's what year is it? 1933 or 34, maybe, Skybirds. And it's actually an old, I believe it's a Gowdy issue of like planes and pilots. Okay, so like Amelia Earhart is in the set. And I guess as that new, flying thing happened, kids were pretty interested in it. And they made a trading card set. Well, a wealthy celebrity recently opened a sealed pack of that set. We put one of those cards in a 10 from like the 1930s. And It does matter the fact that, like, this individual opened these cards straight out of the pack. Like if we're not welcoming that information, assuming, and it's a big assumption that that it's proven that we're not, in other words, we can't assume, but we can go off of facts. And when the facts are in the favor of the card, we welcome those facts all day, because why wouldn't we,
So when you get that card and it looks amazing and it's 90 years old, how do you find out that they open the pack? Do you reach out to them?
No, usually no. We wouldn't really reach out. The only time we'd reach out to a submitter is if, let's say, someone gave us a card that was so odd in its nature that we're just like, we don't think we could grade this. Like, we don't feel comfortable even looking at this. There are times where we'll basically reach out to submitters and tell them what the issue is, why their card is in question. And many times they just so happen to be submitted by those experts that you talk about in the industry, that are experts on these really niche issues, whether it be a soccer set released in the 50s in Brazil, or really anything. The bottom line is, in those circumstances, we welcome any information on those cards, but we wouldn't really go fishing for information either. It's not like we'd say to someone, hey, we noticed this edge looks weird. Do you promise you didn't trim it? It's definitely not that kind of thing. It's just that knowledge is power. And the reason grading companies exist is all of these cards haven't been tracked from the time that they were opened in a Topps pack in 1952 to today. So you don't know if the card's been trimmed or altered or colored, or it's just downright counterfeit. That's where the grading companies come in. But naturally, again, when we have solid information to work with in order to make the best decision possible on behalf of kind of the hobby when evaluating a card, I just think we'd be fools not to welcome that information, assuming, again, that information is 100% verifiable.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I love stories. I tell a lot of stories. It's probably what I'm best known for here. And you said that you could have some stories to share. Do you have any crazy stories of cards that were sent in to you, to SGC? Anything that might be fun to share right now?
Yeah. One quick story is when I first started at SGC. This is probably back in 2019. Okay, so really before SGC really started to take off, we were contacted. I was called over by one of our team members in customer service, and they basically said that they heard something that we used to hear all the time, which is, I have this amazing card. I'm going to send you in this amazing card, almost like, get ready, be prepared to receive it in the mail. How much do I have to pay to get this amazing card graded? And usually what it is it's counterfeit Honus Wagners. That's like the most common thing, where people are almost like, look, I've got the holy grail. And we're kind of like, sure, do us a favor, send us a picture first, because we don't want counterfeit cards sent in. That's just that doesn't help anyone, So if we can avoid it, we try to. So whenever we get those emails, we always ask for pictures, okay? And usually in those pictures, I could just eyeball it and tell the team member working in customer service, like, that thing is as fake as it gets. Like, please tell them to save their money and time and not send in the card. Well, I get called over a few years ago, and the person says, look, this person's claiming they have 30 Gaudy Ruths, 25 Gaudy Lou Gehrig's, 4 complete Gaudy sets, 3 T204 Ramley completes, all of these tremendous claims. And I'm like, yeah, okay, send pictures, please. Well, the person sends pictures, and I'm like, holy crap, this stuff is the real deal. I end up taking the next flight out to St. Louis, okay? And out of St. Louis, I had to then rent a car and drive about 3 hours into, like, the woods of Missouri type thing. And I end up at this really nice guy's house, who was kind of, he was a hunter, and he owned an auction house, kind of like a little private auction house where he usually auctioned off guns and things like that. And he was consigned, imagine someone's father had passed away who collected guns and cards. So the guns went to this individual, and while the guns went, The person just figured, oh, and can you help me sell these cards, not really knowing what they had. Well, the auctioneer didn't really know what he had either, besides the fact that they were impressive because Babe Ruth was in there and what have you. And I went down there and spent, no exaggeration, it must have been 17 hours straight in a basement full of like this treasure trove of cards. I mean, I'm pulling out, there was Bruner's bread cobs in there, and like I said, just mountains of Goudy Ruths. I'm talking like no exaggeration, somewhere between like 25 and 40 Goudy Ruths and Garrigs and 52 Jackies and just the most amazing cards. And bottom line is I ended up kind of separating out for that individual what I thought should be graded and what's kind of fine to just sell as is. And the graded pile was a lot smaller than the as is pile, but both piles were massive. And I ended up basically doing that person a favor. We graded all of those cards, and to thank me for the assistance of flying out and helping that person sort through such an impressive collection, he ended up sending me some venison, some venison in the mail because he's a hunter. And he did it. What's funny, Mike, is he did it through kind of our normal SGC address. So my team that's so used to, cracking open orders and, putting cards in card savers or getting them ready for the operation, one day they open up and there's like deer meat inside a box. And they're like, Pete, are you expecting this? And I'm like, I wasn't. So that was interesting, and I've never, I will never forget that experience. It was just so cool. I was totally by myself. Just amazing to be in a room like that. I mean, something most collectors would dream of. And the nice thing is I wasn't there to buy the cards cheap. You see a lot of people out there who do come across these finds, but it's like, the person's got 300 grand worth of cards there. They're like, oh, I'll give you 20 grand. It just a total, it almost ruins the awesomeness of a moment like that. And the nice thing is just the authenticator is I had no skin in the game. It was basically me just helping this person. And, naturally I was happy SGC gets to grade 30 Goudy Ruths. Why wouldn't I be?
Sure.
But it was just all kind of love between me and this auctioneer. And it was a great experience. It was really cool.
That's a really cool story. That is the venison just tops it off.
Yeah, there's a lot. Like that's one of many, many, many stories. It's working at a grading company, guys, is something very unique in the hobby. You really have a certain perspective that cannot be replicated anywhere else, and I'm very thankful for it.
Yeah, that seems like a good place to stop. I'm gonna end the recording here. I want to just encourage anybody who watches this to put a comment in with what you think. Pete, stick around. We'll talk here after I end this recording. But yeah, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Anytime. And I always say this when I speak. I come off very excited, very passionate, and it's real. I just want everyone to know, guys, that you may not agree with everything that I say, and that's totally, totally, totally fine. The only thing that I want all of you to know is that SGC is here and functioning with all the right reasons in mind. I always say that. You will never run a grading company with better intentions than SGC. You can't beat us in that area. So whether you're a huge SGC fan, or someone that's either never graded with SGC or might never grade with SGC. The only thing that I hope everyone keeps in mind, guys, is that we really are here to make the hobby better, and we really do appreciate all of you. So, Mike, thanks so much for the opportunity, man. I always love just kind of putting myself out there and talking cards and the hobby and SGC, and keep up the great work, man. You're definitely, guys like you don't get enough credit, just kind of keeping the energy and the communication and the community alive in the space. So, it's been fun, man. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Stick around here just for a sec. Thanks, everybody.